No one could tame the mob boss's white tiger until one woman did. Watch until the end. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The cold pre-dawn New York wind cut through the deserted streets of the financial district like a sharp razor, carrying with it the smell of wet concrete and the distant echo of sirens that never seemed to rest. Leo Falcone walked along the empty sidewalks with the same confidence as someone who owned every inch of that territory, his steps echoing rhythmically against the asphalt, while Coda, his white Siberian tiger, moved silently beside him like a lethal and majestic shadow. The tattoos on Leo's neck remained partially visible even under the black leather jacket he wore, ancient symbols that told the story of a man who had built his empire on the rubble of a brutal childhood in the outer boroughs. At 35, he had learned that respect was earned with blood and loyalty was bought with fear. But on that autumn morning, something different hung in the air, an uneasiness that not even he could explain. Coda suddenly stopped, his muscles tense like coiled springs, his dilated pupils fixed on something moving on the corner of Fifth Avenue. Leo followed the feline's gaze and saw a young woman walking hurriedly, a simple pink dress fluttering in the wind as she struggled to balance a pile of books that threatened to collapse at any moment. There was something about her that defied the logic of that cold, urban setting, a brightness that seemed to emanate from within, as if she carried spring with her in the middle of a New York winter. Stella Ricci hadn't noticed the two observers, too focused on not dropping the veterinary anatomy textbooks she needed to return to the library before her first class. Her brown hair danced freely in the wind, framing a face that mixed her mother's Italian delicacy with her father's American strength, creating a natural beauty that needed no artifice. She muttered words in Italian to herself, a prayer her grandmother had taught her for difficult days when the pressure of her studies and work threatened to break her determination. The encounter happened as if fate had orchestrated every second of that moment. Stella tripped on a loose paving stone, the books flying in all directions as she fought to keep her balance. It was in that instant of vulnerability that her eyes met Coda's, and something extraordinary happened. The tiger, who had never shown interest in anything but Leo, walked slowly toward the young woman, completely ignoring the books scattered on the ground. Leo felt every muscle in his body tense, ready to intervene if necessary, but Stella did something that left them both completely still. Instead of running or screaming, she slowly knelt, extending her right hand toward the feline while whispering soft words in Italian, the same language Leo's grandparents spoke when they were still alive. Coda approached cautiously, sniffed the delicate hand, and then, to Leo's absolute astonishment, lay down at the young woman's feet, purring like a house cat. The man who commanded one of the most feared empires in New York watched, mesmerized as Stella stroked the white fur of his beast, her delicate fingers tracing gentle patterns that seemed to soothe not only the animal, but something deep within Leo himself. For the first time in decades, he felt completely disarmed, watching a scene that challenged everything he believed about power and control. Stella finally raised her eyes and met Leo's intense gaze, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the world around them disappeared. There was something in those dark eyes that frightened and fascinated her simultaneously, a depth that spoke of secrets and pains she could never imagine. He was obviously dangerous, every line of his body radiating a contained threat. But there was also a loneliness so profound that she felt the urge to reach out and touch him the same way she had touched the tiger. Leo approached slowly, his movements as controlled as a predator, not wanting to scare its prey. When he stopped just a few feet away, Stella could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something wilder, more primitive. He knelt and began to gather the scattered books, his eyes never leaving her face as he read the titles of the veterinary works. Veterinary medicine, he thought. That explains the connection with Coda. But even this logical explanation couldn't fully justify what he had just witnessed. There was something more to the young woman, something that touched parts of his soul he thought had been dead for a long time. When Leo handed the organized books to Stella, their fingers brushed briefly, and an electric current ran through both their bodies. She murmured a thank you in a low voice, her melodious tone carrying the New York accent he knew so well, but with a sweetness that contrasted drastically with the harshness of the world he lived in. "Thank you," she said, still stroking Coda, who seemed reluctant to move away. "I've never seen such a tame tiger. He's beautiful." Leo smiled, a smile that few people had ever had the privilege of seeing, genuine and completely devoid of the calculated coldness that usually characterized his expressions. "He's only like that with special people," he replied, and immediately regretted the unnecessary honesty. Stella blushed slightly, but held his gaze. "My name is Stella," she said, in a show of courage that surprised them both. "Leo," he replied simply, as if the name didn't carry the weight of a reputation that made grown men tremble, "and this is Coda." From that moment on, something fundamental shifted in Leo Falcone's universe. In the days that followed, he found himself altering his morning routes, always hoping for another chance encounter. He discreetly found out where she studied, where she worked, where she lived, not with predatory intentions, but driven by an inexplicable need to protect that light that had entered his dark life. Stella couldn't get Leo out of her head either. There was something about him that awakened all her protective instincts, as if she could see through the armor of power and violence to the wounded boy he had once been. She found herself looking for him on the streets, dreaming of those dark eyes and the gentle way he looked at Coda. The second meeting happened at the vet clinic where Stella worked, when Leo showed up claiming Coda needed a checkup. It was a transparent lie, as the tiger received the best veterinary care money could buy, but Stella pretended to believe it, happy to see them again. As she examined the feline, she could feel Leo's intense gaze on her, and a sexual tension began to build between them, thick as the air before a storm. He watched her every move, the delicacy of her hands, the concentration on her face, the way she spoke to Coda as if he were a beloved child. When she finished the exam and declared Coda perfectly healthy, Leo asked if she would have dinner with him. The question came out rougher than he intended, laden with a vulnerability he couldn't completely hide. Stella hesitated. All her survival instincts screamed at her to refuse, to get away from this dangerous man before it was too late. But there was something stronger than fear pulsing in her chest, a magnetic attraction that defied all logic. "I'd love to," she finally replied, and thus they sealed the beginning of a romance that would shake not only their lives, but the entire delicate balance of power in the shadows of New York. The restaurant Leo chose for dinner was on the top floor of a building in Soho, with a panoramic view of the city that stretched out like a sea of twinkling lights to the horizon. Stella had never been to such an elegant place, where every detail seemed designed to impress, from the rare orchids decorating the tables to the waiters who moved like silent dancers among the diners. She had chosen the only formal dress she owned, a simple black one her mother had bought on a clearance rack, and still she felt out of place in an environment where a single bottle of wine cost more than she earned in a month. Leo, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, greeting the maitre d' by name and being led to the best table without even having a reservation. Throughout dinner, Stella could observe the fascinating contradictions that Leo represented. He cut his steak with the precision of a surgeon, but his hands were marked with small scars that told stories of a life very different from that opulence. He spoke about art and literature with genuine knowledge, but every now and then slang and expressions from the outer boroughs would slip out, revealing his true origins. "Tell me about yourself," he asked, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. Stella smiled, nervously fiddling with her napkin. "There's not much to tell. I study veterinary medicine at Columbia, work part-time to help with costs, and live with my parents in Queens. A pretty ordinary life." "Nothing about you is ordinary," Leo immediately countered, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "The way you calmed Coda, as if it were natural. I've never seen anything like it." "I've always had a way with animals," she explained, taking a sip of the expensive wine that still made her nervous. "My grandmother used to say it was a family gift. She took care of all the stray animals in the neighborhood when she was a child." Leo listened to every word as if they were verses of poetry, fascinated by the genuine simplicity of a life where love and kindness still existed without ulterior motives. He wanted to tell her about himself, but how could he explain that he had built an empire through methods that would make her run for the hills? How could he talk about the sleepless nights spent planning strategies that would leave other men in ruins? "And you?" Stella asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "What do you do for a living?" "Business," he replied vaguely. "Imports, exports, investments, boring stuff." "It can't be that boring if it allows you to have a tiger as a pet," she teased, and Leo laughed, a rich, deep sound that she felt echo in her own chest. "Coda was a gift to myself when I closed my first big deal," he partially lied. In truth, the tiger had been acquired from an exotic animal trafficker who owed him dangerous favors. But that was a truth Stella could never know. As the night went on, the tension between them intensified. Every glance became more charged. Every accidental touch of their hands on the table sent waves of electricity through both their bodies. Leo fought the desire to protect her from everything, including himself, while Stella found herself drawn like a moth to a flame, knowing she could get burned, but unable to pull away. When Leo insisted on taking her home, Stella hesitated. The armored limousine waiting for them at the restaurant's entrance was another reminder that they belonged to completely different worlds. Throughout the ride, she watched New York through the dark windows, seeing the city where she was born and raised from a completely new perspective. Leo respected her silence, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. The light from the street lamps created a play of shadows on her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her lips and the firm determination in her chin. He wanted to touch her skin, to find out if it was as soft as it seemed, but he knew one wrong move could break the fragile spell that had been cast between them. When they arrived at the simple apartment building where Stella lived, she turned to him with a shy smile. "Thank you for dinner. It was wonderful." Leo got out of the car and walked to the door with her, ignoring the curious stares of neighbors watching from their windows. "I'd like to see you again," he said, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt insecure, waiting for an answer. "I'd like that too," she replied softly, and when he leaned in to kiss her forehead in a show of respect that surprised her, Stella felt that something fundamental had changed in her world. In the days that followed, Leo became a constant but respectful presence in Stella's life. He would show up at the vet clinic with Coda for unnecessary checkups, send flowers to the university without a card. Always careful not to be too invasive, but making it clear that she occupied his thoughts. Stella, in turn, found herself counting the minutes until she saw him again. Her friends at school began to notice changes in her behavior, a new light in her eyes, a constant distraction during classes. She avoided talking about Leo, instinctively knowing that no one would understand the magnetic attraction she felt for this dangerous and mysterious man. The first major crisis arrived when Marco Vettori, Leo's rival in the shadier side of business, found out about his adversary's interest in the young veterinarian. Marco was a man who had turned cruelty into an art form, and he saw in Stella the perfect opportunity to attack Leo's most vulnerable point. The threat came subtly, a note left on Stella's car windshield after a night class. Simple words, but laden with malice. Beautiful flowers wilt easily when cut from the garden. She didn't fully understand the meaning, but her instincts warned her of the danger. When Leo learned of the threat, through informants he kept scattered across the city, a cold fury took hold of him. That night, he appeared at Stella's door unannounced, Coda by his side and an expression on his face that made her instinctively step back. "You need to stay away from me," he said without preamble, his voice laden with a harshness she had never heard before. "Right now, forever." Stella stared at him, seeing for the first time the dangerous man who hid behind the kindness and charm. "What happened?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest in a show of courage that surprised her. "There are people in my world who won't hesitate to hurt you to get to me," Leo explained, each word coming out as if it caused him physical pain. "I can't let that happen." "This isn't just your decision," Stella retorted, surprising them both with her firmness. "If there's danger, we face it together. I'm not a child who needs to be protected." Leo watched her for a long moment, seeing the fiery determination in her honey-colored eyes, and knew he had fallen hopelessly in love with this brave woman. But love also meant protection, and he would do anything to keep her safe. The argument that followed was intense and painful, with Stella demanding the truth about who he really was, and Leo torn between the need to protect her and the desire to be honest. When she finally understood the extent of the dark world he lived in, when the words money laundering and criminal organizations were spoken, the silence that fell between them was deafening. But instead of running away as Leo had expected, Stella took a step toward him. "I don't care who you were," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I care who you choose to be now, with me." In that moment, Leo knew there was no turning back. Stella Ricci had become his reason for living, and he would move mountains to protect the love that was blossoming between them, even if it meant confronting the demons of his own past. Stella's decision not to run away changed everything between them, but it also brought consequences that neither of them was prepared to face. In the weeks that followed, Leo found himself torn between the desire to protect her by keeping her away and the growing need to have her close, to feel that there was still goodness in his corrupted world. They began to meet in discreet places, far from the prying eyes of New York's high society and Marco Vettori's informants. Leo rented a small apartment in Greenwich Village, a refuge where they could just be a man and a woman discovering each other without the external pressures that threatened to destroy them. It was in this apartment that Stella saw Leo without the masks he usually wore. He would cook simple dishes he had learned from his Italian grandmother, his skilled hands transforming basic ingredients into meals that carried memories of a more innocent time. When he spoke about his childhood, his voice would soften, revealing the boy who had dreamed of being an architect before life pushed him down darker paths. Stella, in turn, showed Leo a world he had forgotten existed. She took him for walks in Central Park on Sundays, where they watched families having picnics and children flying kites, scenes of normality that touched something deep in his hardened soul. When she laughed at his jokes, when she touched his face with tenderness, Leo felt as if he were being purified of all the sins he had committed. But reality always found ways to intrude on their refuge. One afternoon, while Stella was studying in the Columbia Library, two men in dark suits approached her. They were elegant and polite, but there was something in their eyes that made her instinctively flinch. "Miss Ricci," said the taller one, a man with graying hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We are attorneys for Mr. Marco Vettori. He would very much like to meet you." Stella felt her blood run cold. Leo had mentioned that name with an expression of pure hatred, and now these men were here, invasive and threatening despite their forced politeness. "I'm not interested," she replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Oh, but we insist," said the other man, his hand closing around her wrist with enough force to make it clear he wasn't asking. "Mr. Vettori is very curious about the young woman who tamed Leo Falcone's beast." What happened next was pure instinct. Stella screamed, drawing the attention of other students, and in the ensuing commotion, she managed to escape, running through the university corridors until she found safety in the middle of the crowd. Her hands were shaking when she called Leo, and he could hear the panic in her voice even over the phone. In less than 15 minutes, Leo was at the university with a security team, his eyes scanning every corner for threats. When he found Stella hidden in the library, pale and frightened, something inside him broke. The fury he felt was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just anger, it was a primal desire to protect what was his. "They can't touch me here." At the university, Stella tried to calm herself, but Leo shook his head gravely. "Marco doesn't care about places or witnesses when he wants something," he said, his hands trembling with suppressed rage. "He's escalating things because he knows you've become important to me." That night, Leo made a decision that would change everything. He called old contacts, dangerous men who still owed him favors, and orchestrated a meeting with Marco Vettori. The chosen location was an abandoned warehouse in the Bronx, far from prying ears, where matters like this were traditionally resolved. Marco arrived punctually, accompanied by his own men, his predatory smile already anticipating victory. He was a short, thin man, but his eyes carried a cruelty that compensated for any physical shortcoming. "Leo, I was wondering when you'd come looking for me," he said, lighting an expensive cigar. "Leave the girl out of this," Leo said directly, each word laden with a contained threat. "Our problems are between us." Marco laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the empty warehouse. "Oh, my dear Leo, do you really think you can have a weakness like that and I won't exploit it? The girl is beautiful, I must admit. It would be a shame if something happened to her." "What do you want?" Leo asked, fighting the urge to strangle the man right there. "I want your territories in the south, your exchange operations downtown, and 50% of your profits for the next 5 years," Marco replied calmly. "In return, your little girlfriend keeps breathing." Leo watched his rival for a long moment, calculating options and consequences. He could accept the demands and watch his empire crumble, or he could fight and risk Stella's life. There was a third option, more dangerous than any other, but one that could solve everything once and for all. 2 weeks, Leo said finally. "Give me 2 weeks to arrange the transfers." Marco smiled, thinking he had won. 2 weeks then. "But Leo, any attempt to deceive me will result in very unpleasant consequences for Miss Ricci." During those 2 weeks, Leo worked feverishly on a strategy that involved contacts in the FBI, documents Marco thought had been destroyed years ago, and a network of information that had taken decades to build. He knew he would only have one chance, and failure would mean not only his own death, but Stella's as well. Meanwhile, he kept Stella protected in his Soho penthouse, surrounded by security 24 hours a day. She hated feeling like a prisoner, but she understood the gravity of the situation. During these confined days, they became even closer, sharing fears, dreams, and an emotional intimacy that neither of them had ever experienced before. It was during one of those nights that Leo finally told her the whole truth about his past, about the choices he had made to survive, about the men he had killed and the principles he had abandoned. Stella listened to him in silence, seeing tears in the eyes of this man who prided himself on never showing weakness. When he finished speaking, expecting her to reject him for good, Stella approached and kissed his tears away. "We all have a past," she whispered against his lips. "What matters is the future we choose to build." That night, they made love for the first time, and it was an experience that transcended the physical. Leo touched Stella as if she were made of precious porcelain, each caress a promise of protection and eternal love. Stella gave herself to him completely, showing him that she trusted not just his body, but his soul. On the last day of the deadline given by Marco, Leo executed his plan, a coordinated operation involving the FBI, the IRS, and evidence of crimes Marco had committed years before. When agents raided Marco Vittori's offices, they found documents linking him to murder, drug trafficking, and large-scale corruption. Marco was arrested that same morning, handcuffed in front of television cameras, in an operation that made headlines across the country. His men scattered like rats abandoning a sinking ship, and his organization crumbled in a matter of hours. When Leo called Stella with the news, she collapsed in tears of relief. "It's over," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "We're free." But Leo knew that the victory over Marco was just the beginning. Other enemies would arise, other threats would materialize. If he wanted to have a real life with Stella, he would have to make even more radical changes to his empire of shadows. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to sacrifice power for love. The fall of Marco Vittori brought a temporary peace, but Leo knew it was as fragile as glass. In the months that followed, he began to implement drastic changes in his businesses, a painful process that required a courage he didn't even know he possessed. He sold off the most questionable operations, cut ties with dangerous partners, and gradually transformed his empire into something that could withstand the light of day. Stella graduated from veterinary school with honors, and Leo was in the front row during the ceremony, as proud as if it were his own achievement. Coda, who had become a constant presence in both their lives, even appeared in the graduation photos, causing a stir at the university that fueled gossip for weeks. It was during this transitional period that Stella's parents finally met Leo. The meeting, carefully orchestrated by her, took place over Sunday lunch at the family's simple home in Queens. Leo arrived without ostentation, driving a regular car and wearing casual clothes that didn't reveal his wealth, but also didn't completely hide who he was. Maria Ricci, Stella's mother, was a small woman with a strong personality who wasn't impressed by the visitor's polite manners. Throughout the lunch, she watched him with piercing eyes, asking direct questions about his intentions with her daughter. Joseph, the father, was more reserved, but Leo could feel the weight of his silent judgment. When Leo asked to speak with Joseph in private, the two men went out to the small backyard where the retired mechanic kept a makeshift workshop. For long minutes, they watched each other in silence, two men from completely different worlds, trying to find common ground. "Mr. Ricci," Leo began, choosing his words carefully, "I know my reputation isn't the best, and I know you have reason to be concerned. But I want you to know that I love your daughter more than my own life, and I would do anything to protect her." Joseph studied the younger man's face, seeing beyond the tattoos and the aura of danger to the sincerity that tried to hide. "My Stella has always had a heart too big for her own good," he said finally. "Since she was a child, she would bring home injured dogs, stray cats, even a marmoset once. Always wanted to save everyone." Leo nodded, understanding the implication. "Do you think she's trying to save me?" "No," Joseph replied surprisingly. "I think she saved you. The question is, what are you going to do with this second chance?" The question echoed in Leo's mind for days. What would he do with the second chance Stella had given him? The answer came when he finally made the hardest decision of his life. He voluntarily turned himself into the FBI, confessing to past crimes, in exchange for immunity to testify against larger criminal organizations. The process was long and painful, involving months of depositions, investigations, and a media frenzy that turned Leo and Stella's private life into a public spectacle. The tabloids feasted on the Beauty and the Beast story, publishing invasive photos and sensationalist speculation about the relationship between the naive veterinarian and the dangerous businessman. Stella faced cruel criticism from strangers on social media, questions about her character at school, and constant pressure from journalists who hounded her for statements. But she remained firmly by Leo's side, attending every hearing, facing the cameras with dignity and publicly defending the man she loved. During this turbulent period, Leo was temporarily removed from his businesses by court order, and they moved to a simple house in upstate New York, far from the spotlight and the pressures of the big city. It was there that they rediscovered the simplicity that had initially brought them together, jointly caring for Coda and a growing collection of rescued animals that Stella couldn't refuse. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch of the house, Leo knelt before Stella with a ring that had belonged to his Italian grandmother, the only pure inheritance he had from a past uncorrupted by violence. "Marry me?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't promise wealth or a life without complications, but I can promise that you will be loved and protected every day of my life." Stella hugged him with tears in her eyes, whispering "yes" against his lips while Coda purred approvingly beside them. The engagement news leaked to the press the next day, causing a new wave of speculation, but they no longer cared. They had found their peace together, and that was all that mattered. The wedding took place in a small, intimate ceremony, with only family and the closest friends, in the garden of their house upstate. Stella wore the wedding dress her mother had lovingly sewn, simple but elegant, while Leo opted for a dark suit without any showiness. Coda was present, of course, wearing a specially made bow tie for the occasion, causing laughter and tears in equal measure. Joseph walked his daughter down the aisle, which was improvised under a century-old tree, and when he handed her over to Leo, he whispered in his son-in-law's ear, "Take good care of her, or you'll have to answer to this old mechanic." Leo nodded solemnly, understanding that he was receiving not just a wife, but an entire family that had accepted him despite everything. The vows they exchanged were written by them, simple words but laden with meaning that made all the guests cry. Stella promised to love Leo in all his imperfections, to accept his past without judgment, and to build a future with him based on truth and mutual respect. Leo swore to protect her not only from external dangers, but also from his own internal demons, to be the man she deserved every day of his life. When the legal process finally ended, with Leo serving his sentence on probation and doing community service, they returned to New York as people completely different from those who had met on that cold dawn on Fifth Avenue. Leo had become a legitimate businessman. His business is now transparent and ethical, while Stella opened her own veterinary clinic specializing in exotic animals, quickly becoming a reference in the city. Coda, now older and even more majestic, became a sort of mascot for the clinic, unwittingly helping in the therapy of autistic children and people with emotional trauma. The tiger's presence, which initially caused fear, gradually transformed into a symbol of hope and transformation, showing that even the wildest beasts could find peace in love. Years later, when Stella discovered she was pregnant with twins, Leo cried like a child. They were sitting on the same porch where he had asked for her hand, watching Coda play in the garden with the other rescued animals they had adopted over the years. The news of the pregnancy represented not only the continuation of their lives, but the definitive proof that it was possible to completely rebuild oneself when true love is the foundation. The story of Leo and Stella became a legend in New York, whispered among circles of friends as proof that true love can transform any heart, no matter how hardened by circumstance. They proved that it doesn't matter where you come from or what mistakes you've made in the past. What really matters is the courage to change and the determination to be better for someone you love. And when their children asked how their parents met, Stella would always smile and point to Coda, who was invariably sleeping in the sun. "It was your Uncle Coda who introduced us," she would say, "because sometimes even the wildest beasts know when two souls are made for each other." Leo would then kiss his wife's forehead, grateful every day for that unlikely encounter that had saved not just his heart, but his very soul. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.